Imagine finding out you re-pregnant and the father of your unborn child is your first cousin. This incredible story is exactly what happened to the author of these lines. A single night, which seemed harmless at the time, turned into a devastating secret capable of turning everything upside down. How do you tell your family about this and what happened next? This story is truly astonishing. Up until that moment, the protagonist's life had been a model of stability and predictability. She grew up in an atmosphere of strong family ties, where every birthday and holiday was celebrated together. The family prided itself on its traditions, its history, passed down through generations. It seemed there was a clear path laid out by her ancestors, and there was no reason to doubt it. She always envisioned her future as quiet, calm, and free from any major upheavals. However, one unremarkable Friday, everything began to change. Her friend Laura insisted she attend a party. The protagonist hesitated, having had a stressful work week and dreamt of resting. But at the last moment, something made her change her mind. Perhaps it was a desire to escape the routine. She accepted the invitation and went to the party without any expectations. The party was crowded, and loud music created an atmosphere of general merriment. It was an unfamiliar setting, but the protagonist decided to enjoy the moment. She chatted with various people, trying to relax and forget about work worries. Standing at the bar, ordering a drink, she heard a familiar voice she never expected to hear in that place. "Marianne!" Turning around, she saw Lucas, her first cousin, smiling at her with surprise and joy. He looked different than she remembered, more grown up, more confident. It was a complete surprise to her. She and Lucas had always been close, almost like siblings. They spent holidays together at their grandparents' house, sharing childhood memories only they understood. But seeing him outside their usual family setting, the protagonist felt something shift within her. They embraced in greeting, and Lucas offered her a drink. As they talked, they reminisced about holidays, games, and childhood adventures. He spoke about his life away from home, the challenges at work, and she watched with interest how he had changed since their last meeting. With each laugh, she felt something new and unknown stirring inside her. It was as if they were in an isolated bubble, where everything else ceased to exist. Lucas casually took her hand, and at that moment she felt a thrill she had never experienced before. She was confused, trying to understand what was happening. He invited her to the dance floor, and the slow music created the perfect atmosphere for closeness. Lucas put his arm around her waist, and their bodies were so close that she could feel his breath and the warmth of his hands. Her heart pounded wildly, and, without fully realizing what was happening, she allowed herself to get lost in the moment. Their faces drew closer, and their lips met in a kiss full of a passion she hadn't even suspected existed. In that instant, all rules and restrictions ceased to exist. She felt lost, yet at the same time, she felt she had found what she had been waiting for her entire life. They surrendered to their feelings, forgetting everything, their kinship, potential judgment, and consequences. That night, they forgot everything, their blood relation, potential judgment, and possible consequences. They gave themselves to each other as if that moment were the only one in their lives. They spent the night together, and every minute was a discovery, a revelation of feelings that had been hidden until then, but somehow made sense. At dawn, reality crashed down on them with full force. Opening her eyes, the protagonist thought for a moment it had been a dream. But seeing Lucas beside her, she realized the full weight of what had happened. She didn't know how to deal with the situation, what that night meant, or how they should move forward. Lucas also looked confused. He remained silent, avoiding her gaze, and she didn't know what to say. They said goodbye with an unsure embrace and returned to their normal lives, but she knew that something had profoundly changed forever. In the following days, her thoughts were consumed by that encounter. Memories of that night haunted her, and she couldn't shake them off. She was torn between guilt and desire, between fear and euphoria. It was a new, frightening, yet irresistible feeling. She knew that no one would understand what had happened between her and Lucas. Their family and society would condemn them, but despite everything, she felt no regret. That night had been a revelation for her, a discovery of a part of herself she hadn't known existed. And as she tried to cope with the storm of feelings, unexpected changes began to occur in her body, small, barely noticeable signs that she couldn't yet explain. A suspicion crept deep into her heart, which she refused to accept. But a few weeks later, her suspicions were confirmed, and this news changed her life forever. That night with Lucas changed the course of my life forever. After that fateful night with Lucas, weeks turned into a turbulent whirlwind of conflicting emotions and oppressive doubts. Every morning, upon waking, I relived that encounter, the vivid sensations and tender touches as if etched on my skin. Trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy, I vainly tried to follow my usual daily routine. But an internal conflict tore me apart, creating a tormenting mix of guilt and an insatiable desire that I didn't know how to handle. No matter how much I convinced myself it was just a fleeting infatuation, the memories persistently surfaced in moments of silence, forcing me to relive that kiss, that trembling touch, the warmth of our bodies again and again. It was as if something previously unknown had awakened in me that night, something that was now impossible to ignore. One morning, getting ready for work, I suddenly felt that something was wrong. A week earlier, I had felt a slight nausea, but I didn't pay attention to it, attributing it to fatigue or a temporary ailment. However, days passed, the nausea became more frequent, and the fatigue seemed to increase with each hour. I felt completely exhausted, as if my body had been drained to the last drop. Deep down, I suspected what it might mean, but desperately refused to acknowledge such a possibility, as if denying reality could help me avoid an inevitable encounter with it. But the signs continued to mount, and fear increasingly gripped me until, in one desperate moment, I decided to buy a pregnancy test. With trembling hands and a wildly beating heart, I entered the pharmacy, bought the test, and returned home, feeling like the bearer of a heavy, forbidden secret. Every second of waiting for the result seemed like an eternity. Holding the test in my hands, I stared at it intently, and an inner voice desperately told me that these were just unfounded fears, that nothing was actually happening. But when the result appeared, the confirmation struck me like a bolt of lightning. Positive, I'm pregnant by my first cousin. The shock was deafening. I was paralyzed, unable to think, unable to comprehend how such a thing was even possible. A wave of panic swept over me. The feeling of despair was so profound it took my breath away. This small piece of plastic in my hands now held an undeniable truth, a truth I never imagined I would face. My world seemed to crumble in an instant, and I didn't know what to do, where to run, or how to react. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, sitting on the couch with the test in my hands. As if it were a nightmare I couldn't wake from, my hands were freezing, and my heart pounded wildly, as if it were about to burst from my chest. I needed to talk to Lucas, but how? How could I tell him such a thing? Would he understand me? Would he support me, or would he be as shocked as I was and leave me to deal with all of this alone? The following days turned into a continuous stretch of agonizing longing. I couldn't think of anything else but this terrible news, and every time I tried to talk to Lucas, fear paralyzed me. I knew he deserved to know the truth, but the fear of his reaction was almost unbearable. And at the same time, there was another, even deeper and insurmountable fear. How would our family react? How could we face their judgment, knowing we had done something so forbidden? After long days of hesitation and sleepless nights, I finally found the courage to tell Lucas everything. I asked him to meet me in the park, where we could talk in a secluded place. When he arrived, nervousness was visible on his face, as if he sensed that something very important was about to happen. Taking a deep breath, I prepared to speak, trying to remain calm. But when the words tumbled from my lips, it was like a dam breaking. Lucas, I'm pregnant. His face went pale, and he stared at me in complete silence, as if the words hung in the air, and he was trying to process what he had just heard. He took a deep breath, shifting his gaze from the floor to me, and for a moment I was afraid he would just leave, abandoning me. But then he took my hand, squeezed it tightly, and said in a trembling voice, "I'm here. Let's face this truth together." Those words brought me indescribable relief. I felt a tear roll down my cheek and a huge weight seemed to dissipate. I wasn't alone. Lucas was by my side, ready to confront this situation, regardless of the consequences. But at the same time, we understood that the hardest part was yet to come. The decision to keep the baby meant harboring an almost unbearable secret, and the fear of telling our family was overwhelming. So we decided to keep the pregnancy a secret for now. We needed time to think everything through, decide how to tell them, and prepare for the inevitable judgment. We met whenever possible, and each meeting was filled with a mix of fear and hope. We knew that this secret was a heavy burden on our shoulders, but at the same time, it gave us the strength to move forward. These days became a true test, as every slightest sign of pregnancy that I tried to hide seemed to scream to the world. Every bout of nausea, every flash of fatigue was a reminder of what was happening, of what I carried within me. My mother, always attentive and observant, began to ask questions. She noticed changes in my behavior, my paleness, how I avoided talking about certain topics. With each family gathering, the tension seemed to increase. My aunts and uncles exchanged meaningful glances and quiet whispers. I felt watched, as if everyone was waiting for me to stumble, to reveal the secret I was so carefully guarding. The tension was unbearable, and the fear of exposure consumed me more each day. Daily routine consumed the protagonist like quicksand. One evening, at a family dinner, her aunt, a woman known for her straightforward nature, invited her for a frank, private conversation. Curiosity was evident in her aunt's gaze, and she immediately got to the point, asking if the protagonist was hiding anything. At that moment, her heart pounded wildly, and despite all attempts to hold back, tears streamed from her eyes. She realized she could no longer keep her secret. The burden of it had become unbearable, and the truth burst out in a trembling whisper of confession. "I'm pregnant, Aunt, and Lucas is the father." The shock reflected on her aunt's face was deafening. She froze in silence, as if trying to process what she had heard, and for a moment the protagonist thought hugs or words of comfort would follow. However, instead, her aunt left with an expression of extreme disbelief, mixed with disappointment and misunderstanding. The protagonist realized that this secret was no longer hers alone, and that soon the entire family would know the truth. After that conversation, it became clear that hiding the truth was no longer possible. Tired of living in an atmosphere of whispers and suspicious glances, the protagonist decided to organize a family dinner on the weekend, inviting everyone. As family members arrived and took their seats, she felt the weight of the impending confession. She exchanged a glance with Lucas, full of complicity. His confidence, conveyed through a firm handshake, gave her strength. When everyone was seated at the table, the protagonist stood up and took a deep breath. Her heart pounded wildly, and tension filled the air. "I want to share something important with you all," she began, her voice slightly trembling. "Lucas and I, we're together, and we're expecting a baby." The ensuing silence was deafening. The protagonist scanned each face at the table, observing various reactions: shock, disappointment, disbelief. Her father abruptly stood up, seemingly unable to accept what he had heard. His gaze was a mixture of pain and anger. "Marianne, how could this happen? You're cousins! This is a betrayal of our family!" Then his gaze, full of reproach, turned to Lucas. "I always treated you like a son, and this is how you repay me?" Lucas seemed to struggle to find words. Finally, taking a deep breath, he replied, "I understand it's hard for you all to accept. I know we're breaking societal norms, but our feelings are sincere, and we want our child to grow up in an atmosphere of love, not guilt." His words hung in the air, but seemed to have little effect. Some family members got up from the table, shaking their heads and whispering among themselves, expressing clear indignation. The protagonist's mother sat silently, covering her face with her hands, not knowing how to react. Seeing her in such a state, the protagonist felt a lump in her throat. Aunts and uncles looked at the couple with a mixture of disappointment and sadness. This was their new reality, and it was clear to everyone that family relationships would never be the same. At that moment, the protagonist's grandmother, maintaining her composure, slowly approached and placed her hand on her arm, expressing her love and support. "Marianne, sometimes life leads us down difficult paths. I don't know what to say, but I'll always be there." Her words became the spark of understanding the protagonist so desperately needed. The realization that her grandmother supported them, albeit with reservations, was a comfort amidst the raging storm. After that dinner, the protagonist and Lucas found themselves isolated. Family ties were severed, and visits that were once commonplace now seemed impossible, as if their presence was an unpleasant reminder of what the family would prefer to hide. Each day became a struggle. The judgment of others followed them everywhere, and the feeling of rejection by their own family grew stronger. Soon the news spread throughout the town, and the condemnation spilled beyond their home. People whispered in the streets, gave the couple scornful looks, or pretended not to notice them. They were forced to hide, preferring isolation to confrontation with hostility. On one particularly difficult day, Lucas hugged the protagonist and said, "None of this matters as long as we're together, Marianne. Our love is real, and we'll build a happy life for ourselves and our child no matter what others think." Despite his comforting words, the burden of judgment was unbearably heavy. The protagonist constantly thought about her child's future, fearing that he would bear the stigma of their choices. The fear that their baby would suffer from criticism and gossip haunted them. Mutual support was their only anchor in this situation. However, external pressure inevitably affected their emotional state. A few weeks after the pregnancy announcement, the protagonist's cousin John unexpectedly visited the couple. He arrived without warning and, smiling shyly, said he wanted to talk. In the privacy of the living room, he confessed that he had thought a lot about the situation and, although he didn't fully understand what had happened, he believed that love deserved respect. "I know many people are judging you," he said, looking at them with sympathy, "but I want you to know that you have my support. Family is not just blood ties, but also support when everyone else turns away." In life's difficult moments, when it feels like the whole world is turning its back on you, it's especially valuable to have someone by your side who is ready to offer support. John became just such a friend, whose words and actions warmed their souls. He visited regularly, bringing not only his company, but also valuable advice and words of comfort. John genuinely understood their experiences and was always ready to listen without judgment. His presence served as a reminder that there was still kindness and understanding in the world, which gave them the strength to resist external criticism. As the pregnancy progressed, so did the acceptance of the situation by those around them, though not as quickly as they would have liked. Her father, initially reserved and distant, was the first to reconcile. One evening, he called her for a frank conversation, asking her to explain how everything had happened. It was a long talk, full of tears and mutual recriminations. In the end, her father sighed, looked her in the eyes and said, "You are my daughter, and I will be there, even if I don't fully understand." Soon, other relatives began to show attention, bringing gifts and good wishes for the future baby. It was clear that many still had doubts, but the very fact of attempting to understand and accept the situation brought relief. Their presence brought a new lightness to the atmosphere, as if the impending birth of the child smoothed over the rough edges. On the day of the birth, Lucas was constantly by her side, supporting and encouraging her through every moment of that momentous event. When Gabriel was born, an indescribable feeling of happiness overwhelmed her. All the pain and fear instantly gave way to boundless love and serenity. Looking at his face, it became clear that despite all the difficulties, the real journey was just beginning. Gabriel's arrival brought a new dynamic to family relationships. Some relatives, previously hostile, began to view the situation from a different perspective. The child had an amazing ability to unite, and gradually, he won hearts. Aunts and uncles who had once avoided meetings now frequently visited their home, bringing gifts and offering help with the baby's care. Time became an ally in this process. Each family gathering provided an opportunity to restore lost connections, and people who had once judged now saw a family genuinely striving to be together. Lucas's and her love became a strong, unbreakable foundation, and Gabriel grew up in an atmosphere of love and understanding. Gradually, sharp remarks were replaced by smiles, and rejection gave way to acceptance. Over time, their home transformed into an island of calm, where acceptance and love prevailed over fear and judgment. Gabriel grew up surrounded by warmth and care, and his presence filled their home with light. He was a curious, joyful, and intelligent boy. Lucas and she dedicated themselves to his upbringing, striving to create a safe environment where he could grow and thrive without fear of judgment. However, difficult moments still occurred in their family life. The history of their relationship and the prejudices they faced left emotional scars. On tough days, these feelings would return, but they always found strength in each other to move forward. Together, they laid a strong foundation for their family, determined to overcome any obstacles. With time, their love grew stronger and became a true fortress. They learned to react calmly to prejudice and endure adversity steadfastly. The support of close friends and some family members strengthened their resolve, and with Gabriel's arrival, they felt their path becoming increasingly confident. They knew that there would still be difficulties ahead, but they were ready to face them together. When Gabriel turned 7, he began to ask questions about his family. He understood that their relationship was different from those of his friends, and he was curious why some relatives were not present at important events. Although he was still very young, Lucas and she understood that sooner or later, they would have to tell him the truth. One evening, after another such question, they talked about whether to open up to their son. "I think we should be honest," Lucas said, looking worried but firm. "He deserves to know who we are and how much he is loved, no matter what." With hearts full of doubts and fears, they decided to tell Gabriel the simplest and truest version of their story, explaining that their love had faced obstacles but had proven strong enough to create a family. One evening after dinner, they called Gabriel for a frank conversation. He sat beside them, looking curiously at his parents. Lucas and she exchanged glances, and then she began to speak, carefully choosing her words. "Gabriel, you know our family is a little different from others, right?" she began, trying to remain calm. "Your father and I have known each other since childhood, and we had a special friendship that grew into love. It wasn't an easy love, but we really wanted to be together and create a family, and you became the most beautiful gift of that love." He listened attentively, and in his childlike innocence, seemed to accept every word. Gabriel hugged them and said with a smile, he wrapped them in a hug, his face beaming with a genuine smile, "I'm so happy for you." He said from the bottom of his heart. In that moment, their souls were filled with unspeakable relief. They knew that many challenges still lay ahead, given Gabriel's young age, but this first honest conversation became a cornerstone in the foundation of understanding and trust. This honesty, like an invisible thread, bound their family ties even more tightly. Years passed, and Gabriel blossomed into a confident and loving child, which filled their hearts with pride. However, they understood that sooner or later, he would face the prejudices they themselves had struggled with. When Gabriel started school, curious children began to ask questions about their unusual family. Gabriel, not yet fully understanding the complexity of the situation, turned to them for clarification. Lucas and Marianne, armed with patience, explained to him that their family was built on love and that there was nothing wrong with being different. This open dialogue strengthened Gabriel's emotional resilience, teaching him to answer questions with confidence and dignity. This period became a realization for them that, despite outside opinions, They had created a home where love and acceptance were the unshakable foundation. Gabriel grew up in an atmosphere where he could be himself, unashamed of his origins. Over time, some family members who had previously avoided them began to show signs of reconciliation. Marianne's mother was among the first to try to mend relations, wanting to get to know her grandson better. One day, as Marianne played with Gabriel in the garden, her mother called her for a talk. "Marianne, I know it took me time to accept all this," she said with tears in her eyes, "but Gabriel is a true blessing. I see your love for him and for this family. I regret not understanding it sooner." These words brought Marianne a wave of relief and joy. Her mother's support was what she had longed for, and her presence meant that the family was finally reunited. Gradually, other relatives also began to draw closer, and with time, acceptance replaced the former rejection. In society, their story evolved from scandalous to inspiring. Lucas and Marianne actively participated in Gabriel's community projects and school events, demonstrating their family's dedication and unity. Year after year, they earned the respect of those around them. One day at a school meeting, a parent approached them and said with admiration, "I see you at all the events. You're always so dedicated to Gabriel. You're a wonderful family." These words reflected their achievements. The struggle for recognition had been long and difficult, but now they were looked upon with admiration. The community, once critical, had finally accepted them, and this filled their hearts with pride. Years later, when Gabriel became a teenager, they decided to share their story with him in full detail. They spoke about the beginning of their love, the difficulties they had faced, and how much it meant to them. He listened attentively and with surprising maturity replied, "You went through all that for me. You're amazing." He hugged them, and they felt their journey had entered a new phase. Gabriel understood his origins and deeply respected his parents for fighting to create their family. Their story, once hidden and causing shame for some, became a legacy of love and resilience that they passed on to their son. Gabriel grew into a strong and confident individual who knew his roots and was proud of his family. Their story became a lesson in love and acceptance, and they finally found the peace they had sought for so long. They looked back at everything they had built and understood that, despite all obstacles, they had made the right choice. Their family became an example of what they wanted to be, a place where love reigns, where respect is unconditional, and where everyone is happy just to be together. Lucas and Marianne knew that their love and their journey would forever remain an example that true love can overcome even the most challenging barriers. Together, they built a home that stands against all prejudices and proves that ultimately, love is the answer to all questions.